All right, here we go. Yo, here's another episode of the Mind Body Marathon. And this is a fun show. So we're kind of on the road with the show today. We're at Second Soul in Canton, Ohio. And we're going to talk about running shoe industry and injuries and just kind of how to manage that. We got some regulars on the show with Dr. Matt, Zach, ZMG Massage, and then our newbie, Dylan, here. So he's our shoe specialist, guys. So we're going to appeal to him. He's got his notepad. So we're excited about that. So we're gonna go into the trenches a little bit with some shoes. So this will be fun. So thanks so much for joining us. All right.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
So here we go. This is about 80%. So Dr. Matt and I are chiropractors, Zach's a massage therapist. About 80% of our clients are runners or endurance athletes. So, triathletes and distance runners, all the way from high school, middle school to professional.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a litany of different injuries, and we often see how shoes can impact injuries. So this, I feel like, is a really important topic for us to kind of flesh out. And we kind of have some hasty generalizations that we utilize in the office in terms of what to recommend. And so we're going to kind of plow through some of those ideas.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So first off, fill us in what's new in the running shoe industry.
It's a good time to be in the running shoe world.
It's exciting.
Yes, it is.
It's so exciting.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced it over the years and the changes, and there's a lot of stagnation, I think, to a point for a while. But the last couple of years with innovation's grown and changed, and especially with the Olympics coming to America in 28, every brand's kind of on their A game. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Like what?
We could dive way in. Every brand's bringing good stuff. I mean, the big points of it all right now is, the innovation in foam and technology and performance you're getting back from it has definitely been the lead in everything. But a lot of it has also trickled down to daily trainers and how that's changed over the years.
Yeah.
From maybe what we're accustomed to wearing to now what the new norm is across the board.
So would you say one of the main inflection points in the running shoe design and industry with industrial design is the carbon fiber plate?
Carbon's getting all the attention.
Yeah.
That's what everyone's loving and racing in. But I mean, the biggest game changer from energy efficiency and return, it's coming from the foams across the board. The days of traditional EVA foams still exist in the shoes, but a lot of it now is coming down to supercritical foams, different response and sensation. For the longest time, we fit athletes and runners alike on this is what your foot structures, this is what it is, but now you can fit on sensation and experience.
So who's killing the foam game right now?
I mean, the leader's still the swoosh. When they want to focus on it, Nike's definitely the king of it. That's always the question. Right. But I mean, there's great stuff. I mean, the leaders we look towards is Asics, Brooks. So
why is that?
They seem to be the ones that want to push the envelope the most. A lot of brands are putting out one foam, and this is Nike ZoomX, right? Well, Asics is differentiating their lineup altogether based on your cadence and how the foam might interact with your foot because of that. Brands are finding ways to bring that supercritical, that really high-end foam in racing down into daily trainers to give that same experience, but not risk the injury as much as well.
Yeah.
That's interesting with cadence. How is Asics kind of designing to do that? Because if there's the easiest kind of quick and dirty way to get somebody to improve their form, naturally you're going to just try to get them to up their cadence a little bit. We can kind of talk a little bit about what that even means, but cadence as a whole should kind of sit like 170-ish range, potentially up to 180. And if somebody's in the 150s, there's absolutely no way they're going to overcome any injuries. It doesn't matter how hard they try. They're just going to consistently get injured. And it has to do with compression and shearing forces and all that. We can kind of dive into that. But how is Asics foam sort of designing around that idea?
Yeah, I mean, starting at the racing end, everyone has their carbon-plated marathon shoe or high-end performance shoe, but Asics is taking to the next step where there's the Metaspeed Sky, which is your equivalent to a Vaporfly, and then they've got or Alpha, and then they have a Metaspeed Edge. So it's all depending on if you're that more forefoot responsive snappy runner or more of that rolling sensation where maybe the cadence and form is changing. So they're even looking at the 1% of the industry of racing and how to break that down because feet are different past there. Yeah.
Now, are they going to start like implementing different densities of that super foam in different areas based off of that as well? Like the old traditional shoes would have, like for stability shoes, they would just have the shoe, wedge where there's just a dense material of foam in the medial aspect of the midfoot. So that way, as you compress, it doesn't allow you to roll in. Will they kind of incorporate that a little bit more into it?
Yeah, I mean, focusing on racing first,
Mhm.
that's already starting to happen. Brooks is kind of the leader and the easiest one to explain is they're switching the size of the cell of their foams where a smaller cell gives more response.
Mhm.
So in the forefoot, they're having a smaller cell of foam, their supercritical foam, to give that more responsive fit. And then towards the heel, it's a little bit of a larger cells with a more plush sensation.
Mhm.
And
Man,
that,
this is
Does that
all-
obviously makes it lighter, I would imagine.
yeah, definitely makes it lighter, but you have to have, to use the shoe, you have to be ready. It's like you can't just pick a tool up from the tool
Yeah.
shed, not know how to use it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's all coming down now, where that at first was living only in the race world. And now, like the Brooks Glycerin, a nice daily trainer, they're bringing that same material into the daily world now.
Are they manipulating the drops at all? Or are
Dro-
the drops kind of staying like basically the heel to the forefoot kind of profile of the shoe?
It's starting to level off. I mean, we had it's like a pendulum. For the longest time, it was 12, 12,
Yeah,
12, and there's
everything
the
was 12.
0. And now a lot of brands are falling in that like 5 to 8
Yeah.
window.
Mhm.
That's a good window. I like that window. That's my favorite window, to be honest, to be in that
What
five.
do
middle-
you,
yeah.
you're in topos, right?
I was, and I'm in Ultra.
But,
Yeah.
but even Ultra, I mean, they
I know.
lived on 0. That was who they were.
Yeah.
And in 22,
So
they
I
brought
have
out-
their lifted, I have their experience flow and wild, and I love them.
It's a great,
Yeah.
Wild's fun on the trails.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
But they're even getting into the 4mm game because
Yeah.
they recognize feet are different.
And that
you
is the
guys-
4mm one.
Yeah.
That's what I ran at the Grand Canyon. And
Mhm.
I didn't know that. I thought you were still in topos.
no, no,
I was just staring at the rocks the whole time.
You were staring.
So, but even with that, talking about the foams and how they change, getting into support, as you mentioned, the medial structure, even that's changed from
Yeah.
having a
So instead of like your traditional like dual max or something like that, or
trussic.
trussic.
Yeah, that's even going away. Brands are using guide rails, but even more now, stability is provided by geometry.
Okay.
And maybe the denseness of foams will change to a
Mhm.
point, but it's a lot of it now is going away from a curved last to a straight last to a point, really.
So walk us through the idea of the last and what that means for
Yeah, I
a
have no
general
idea
foot
what
strike.
you're talking about.
Yeah. So
It's
you're
okay to be
familiar
honest
with
here.
it. Yeah. No, it's learning for everyone. So for the longest time, running shoes were all built on a curved last. It
Mhm.
caused that midfoot to be a little more slender and narrow and have
Okay.
that more open forefoot area to have that crash pad to land on. And over the years, brands want to get rid of unnecessary pieces of material to lighten up the shoe, right? So they're getting rid of the denser material that provided the post in the past, and now they're making the shoes more straight last. What that means is there's not as much curvature in the shoe. It's just a wider, stable piece from the heel to the forefoot. So you have a
Mm.
larger area to land on,
Mhm.
and that can help with overpronation by giving you that spot to correctly land and stabilize.
So the guide rail idea, is that like a bumper bowling sort of thing? Like the
Mhm.
rails are a little bit different on the medial versus the lateral side of the shoe, or the inside versus the outside?
Correct. Yeah. And more brands are still using guide rails. I mean, that still exists. More shoes are kind of creating like the bathtub sensation where you just settle into a shoe and the foam kind of wraps around the foot to a point.
Okay.
But stability now, even if people don't think they need it, it's there in almost every shoe.
Mhm.
In some aspect.
Correct. And I think that's good.
Cool.
Even
I do too.
even if you're an efficient neutral runner with 180 cadence, you might still need a little bit on those easy days.
Yeah.
And it's going to help just take
Mhm.
care of the small parts for
Yeah,
you.
different torque patterns and
Or
stuff.
even at like mile 18 of a marathon where you're just like, oh, this stinks really bad.
You're
I
huffing
know
and
it's
puffing.
amazing. If you're running a marathon, it's amazing. Like when somebody's like in an alpha flight, how loud people get by the end
Yeah.
of the race.
Yeah. But even Nike, I mean, we think of them as this pristine brand and this superior thing. People have this concept for some reason. And even them, like their new marathon or trail marathon racing shoe, the Ultrafly, that's a wider,
Dude, that's what I ran the
Base.
Canyon in.
yeah. So that's actually a wider forefoot pad than any Ultra or Topo
Yeah.
provide. And
It's like
that's,
a
you don't
lily
think of
pad.
that.
Definitely keeps you nice and contained.
Now, is there a theory behind it? The wider the footprint, like in the forefoot, then it kind of nudges you back to like that neutral position because it just like as you start to top over, it like adds a bumper like almost
Yeah.
at the ground level.
It does. And
Yeah.
they even change how the foam is shaped in the forefoot, where maybe they'll have something, if you have a really rigid arch, you're on that outside pinky, they'll kind of raise up that foam a little bit to correct you.
Mhm.
Or the opposite, maybe something towards the big toe, they'll lift that up a little bit to kind of give you something more stable so that foot's not collapsing in still.
Now, do shoe companies even provide like supination support anymore for like the 1% of people who supinate
Mhm.
still?
You're still getting into neutral shoes.
You're
There's
still
nothing
getting-
like
yeah.
specific to it anymore.
I just
Wow.
haven't seen some of those shoes in like
Yeah, I was
no.
thinking
decade.
about that too. To
Those
ask
are your
that
nursing
question.
shoes right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of that's being answered just by the wider footbed.
Yeah.
Right? They're trying to give you that larger crash pad and hopefully build up the foam where it's needed in those pressure points. Even like the outsole material that takes the beating on the rubber, maybe they're beefing that up a little bit so you're having a little more durability in the shoe.
Okay.
So this change in EVA and density and foam and all that, is it more durable? Does it last longer?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us, we grew up on that polyurethane or EVA foam, where it's the very traditional foam.
Yeah.
And that's still incorporated in most shoes because it is durable. But within the shoe, now they're able to provide different sensations and experiences, whether it's TPU material, a PIBA, a super critical material where it's you can have a different sensation. You want something that's durable and comfortable, or do you want something that's more light and bouncy? You can kind of fiddle with that.
Interesting.
Profile is interesting to me because profile basically is referring to the heel relative to the forefoot. And with regards to injuries, I guess there's really some of the gamut of research is kind of leading to think that if somebody has consistent hip, knee, or basically knee up issues, like knee, hip, back sort of issues, that they should be in a lower profile shoe, which is basically kind of taking their center of mass and kicking it a little bit over to their midfoot. And then traditionally in the office, if somebody has like foot ankle issues, we try to encourage them to go a little bit higher profile. Because like in a high heel, if you think of that, that shortens the tendons, takes pressure off the plantar fascia and Achilles, so it doesn't have to stretch as long every time it lands. Is that consistent kind of with some of the stuff you guys see in the shoe store?
It is, but that itself has changed. When I guess when I first started visiting you guys 10 years ago, like we thought 28 millimeters was a high stack height, right? And now that's what we'd call almost not minimal, but that's a lower profile. And you have a lot of stuff up in that 38 to 45 world now. So it has changed over the years what that means. But I think
what about the tilt?
Like the drop,
like you were saying, the drop,
yeah. I mean, the drop I think has stayed similar, but they've been able to now in the last couple of years find ways to increase the stack height without giving up the instability.
Okay,
which I think is a pretty
Is that
important
from widening the shoe?
That's widening it and then finding out how to work with the foams better. I mean, for the longest time, supercritical foam, so like injecting carbon into a shoe, caused a lot of instability over the years. And that used to actually be how they made support pieces, like in the Saucony Guide in the past. It was a carbon infused EVA piece in the medial side.
Yeah.
So now they found ways to make that so it creates the shoe stable without adding weight.
Will they still, so you said the industry is kind of moving towards your 5'8" range. Are they still going to have your crazy 12 drops?
They still have them. I mean, Mizuno still lives in that world, right? Wave
Yeah,
Riders.
But
never
that's so
gone
weird
away.
because they were always were middle profile because of the wave. They would always say that you're going to be kind of lower anyways because you're going to crash on the wave.
Yeah, and they're going to trust the wave's going to, respond back like a trampoline to a point. But I mean, there still is that 10 to 12 window, and we still, rely on that to a point. But I mean, it's all about listening to the customers and what they need. With a knee issue, a cadence issue, whatever. Every shoe can help you to a point. But even talking about the profile of the shoe, when we're now talking about how your foot's landing, there's way more of this forefoot focused drive in the industry. Where in the past, maybe the Convara or Verata are the only things that lived there, or Pureflow. Or now even these huge shoes. Yeah.
Those are amazing.
The best shoe in the entire world.
I miss them. But even now, there's a new era of that where you've got shoes like from Brooks Hyperion Max, where it is, whether it's with a plate or without a plate, it's getting on that forefoot and kind of taking some of the pressure off instead of just thinking this is my drop in the shoe. The shoe is going to act a little differently because of how it's created now.
It's really weird when I got the Hyperion, was it the Tempo 2s or whatever, not the last one, but the second to last one. The rocker, we always talk about rocker plates being at the front, where you kind of rock onto your toes. That was the first one where I felt like it had a rocker plate like at the heel.
Yeah.
And when I first started running on it, it was like I would be walking and it almost like tripped because it would push me forward. And there was a point in time when I first got it, like it was hitting right where like my tibial nerve was like rolling around the heel, and I had to like break it in for like a good
well, that's kind of that bathtub idea where they basically are changing that now so that they can encapsulate that nerve a little bit better in the heel.
So, but it was just really weird to have a rear rocker panel.
And that brings up a good point, right? Because when you're starting to manipulate the the densities, and especially with carbon fiber, that will apply more of a broader pressure across the foot rather than having equal distribution through. So how does a company like Nike or, some of the people that are putting more their carbon fibers in trainers, like how do they get around that? Does that make sense?
You're asking how do they
get around the equal force plate, basically, because the carbon plate is stiff, right?
Right.
And it creates, it's like basically like a pressure stamp all the way down. are they manipulating the EVA of the forefoot relative to the heel so that it creates more of a smooth ride, or how are they doing
Yeah,
that?
I mean, there are a couple ways you're going about it. One is the durometer, which is the responsiveness or firmness of
That's
the
a cool
shoe.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Durometer.
Can you say it again?
Durometer. I don't know how to
No,
use it
yeah.
actually, but
gosh.
durometer matters. So durometer is basically how you create the stiffness of the foam. A softer durometer or higher is going to be softer and lower is firmer. So that's part of it, how they're doing it and how they're basically grading the foam to the plate when they interact is how does that responsiveness change, and then how they're incorporating foams. In the past, it would be like a layer of foam, a plate, a layer of foam. Now you can actually blend the foam materials, so you can get the durability of an EVA foam, but still get the excitement of something else in the foam.
What's the longest somebody has run that you know of in a carbon fiber shoe? Like how many miles?
My brother's probably the worst culprit of that. Yeah.
How much?
He's getting like a Vaporfly, and that came out. They're like, hey, this is whatever, 2 or 3 marathon cycles, and that's it. And he's got still some that have 700-800 miles on them.
Yeah, I was going
and
to say.
people are going through it. You're getting your bang for your buck.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast where this guy said that he pushes his super shoes.
Yeah.
Like to
Who
that.
was it?
Roche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of, I guess,
Towards a K, right?
What's that?
Towards 1,000 miles.
yeah, it's just, I guess, the responsiveness you want out of it. You're gonna have that nice poppy race day sensation early, but if you break it down,
well, I feel like the Alpha lives longer, anyways, than the other one.
For sure.
Than the.
But think back to like the Mayfly, right?
Yeah.
When that came out, you're like, hey, you're getting 70 miles at best.
And then you're ripping a hole through that toe.
Yeah. So they found ways to create it to last longer. And certain shoes, if you're not using them all the time, that shoe recovers just like we recover, right? We need to sleep. A shoe needs to sleep. So you can definitely extend the life on that thing.
Let's switch directions a little bit. In running shoe stores, are you seeing different types of injuries come through the door than before?
We've seen a lot more hip and knee.
Called it.
Yeah. And
I
would imagine that lives in your world, and it's like like you guys are providing a service to athletes, right? But like you can't rely on the service to solve everything. That's just like a resource. It's not the whole picture. And the shoes, as cool as they are and as great as they are, the shoe's not going to solve you. I mean, it's going to help you and create it, but you have to be like ready to use the shoe too. So when you see a lot more high school kids, they want these high-end foam shoes and the fun stuff. Like if you're not in the basic stuff, you can't do 100% of your mileage in a plated shoe or supercritical foam. So it's instability is still being caused. And if you're maybe not that elite athlete, you're having injury issues.
Right.
I was talking, that's who it was. I was talking to Mark Shannon, and he was talking about how he pretty much does every single one of his runs in a plated shoe now. And he's been able to run, 15, 20% more a week. And I know some of the East Africans have said that as well. Especially the Adidas athletes, they say they can run more miles per week per se with that. Is that kind of something you're finding as well?
Yeah, I mean, that top 1% for sure. I mean, if you're
just because they're more efficient,
they're way more efficient. That shoe's going to lean to them, but you're gonna have a lot of high school athletes or daily runners who their cadence is probably only 160, 165. And they can't rely on that shoe to do everything. So if you're crashing how it's not supposed to be done, just those small microseconds.
Well, that's a good point. So in the 2021 or 2020 trials, which was in 2021, I spoke with a guy named Devin Volk, and he was commissioned to do some of the initial Nike work for the Next Percents. And so he works out of the Oregon State lab, and he said in the lab with the early iterations of the Nike Next Percents, they were able to find up to 7% gain. But he said it's a rich get richer scenario, because if your form is off, then it actually detracts from performance to a point. So like you said, if your cadence is lower, you're not taking advantage of the clipping of that actual carbon fiber. What's interesting is back when I first got out of college, there was a shoe company called Spira, and they literally, I think they still exist. It's an Italian company, I think. They literally had springs in their shoes. They literally had springs in the heel and the forefoot. And then within like a couple months of coming out in the summer, everybody was racing in them. And then they were banned like within a couple months.
Cheers.
Devin said
they were lightweight Nike Shocks.
Well, what he said was they only actually improved your output by up to 4%, but they were banned. But yet Nike was able to have up to 7% gains, and obviously they're not banned.
Obviously, yeah.
Well, that's part of it too, is why Nike, the first super shoe, the 4% came out, because that's what in general the lab came back at.
Yeah,
and the name
on average.
Yeah, and the name switched to Next Percent because they couldn't quantify it for every athlete. So now, I mean, compared to like a Streak 6, what we kind of grew up in is like the whatever sub-modern day shoe, everything's based off of that. So like the next version of the Vaporfly, when that comes out in April, on average, that's 8 or 9% return. So it is changing still, but it's just how can you take advantage of it is the
Would
question.
you say in regards to super shoes like that, is there, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard this, that there's a certain pace that the runner needs to be running to even maximize on the bend of the carbon plate to be able to maximize on the return.
Is it pace or just
or is it cadence?
It's cadence and force.
Yeah, cadence and force, right?
Okay, so it's more that than actual pace then.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah. 'cause
okay.
that can
Which is
change.
interesting though, because when I was on the trail with the Ultraflies, I did feel the plate
Mhm.
because it's plated, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Carbon plated.
Yeah. I did feel that.
So it's definitely different, and it's every brand is doing this. Like I know we keep talking about
Mhm.
Nike, and that's a focal point because of who they are for racing. But it doesn't matter if you're Saucony, Asics, Brooks, Hoka. Everyone has something incredible out there.
So what do they do? Like, okay, so let's go through what. So I want to make sure we touch on the hip conversation because we drove by that. But what is in a hasty generalization? What is like an Asics plate versus a New Balance plate versus an Adidas? Like, what are some of the differences between these brands and their high-end shoes?
Starting at the plate, a lot of it is from the degree the plate is at. Some will be a little bit of a higher degree, so a little more steeper to have a little more of aggressive forefoot sensation.
Okay.
And then others
So
are
it's
how it's
literally a
split.
tilt forward.
Correct.
Yeah. So like, because basically if you have like those old school like toys where you kind of flip it back, that's kind of how it's set up, right? That's
Yeah.
how Devin said. So like the plate's kind of set up forward like this. So when you land, if you land perfectly, it kicks back with more force. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But even have brands like Adidas, and they go with like a pronged approach. Think of your toes, your feet, and they have the prongs throughout it because every metatarsal and part of your body is reacting differently. So it's going to be an individual spring.
And Brooks does that too with their Hyperion Elites, right?
Mhm.
Where it's individual. And what's unique about theirs is the prongs are each different for each size of the shoe.
So if you look at the actual plate, it's not combined in the forefoot?
It's
There's a little-
different.
separate.
Like some are like a fork almost, or like a
Oh,
tuning
that's
fork where
cool.
it's split up. Some are one piece, some are individualized. So
I'm
it's all
learning
different.
So much.
I'd like to see data like in a year or two on like the amount of stress fracture reactions, like
in the fork,
in
yeah,
the
exactly, in
forefoot.
the forked ones, yeah,
Yeah.
I would imagine, because you're just
If you don't have your foot like or your toe directly over it, it's
if the
gonna
force
like,
isn't if the force isn't manipulated further up the chain in the hip, then you will load each metatarsal difference. So it's almost a little riskier. That's a really get richer shoe then.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the
You have to
average runner
yeah.
might not take advantage of that, and the load could be too much.
Yeah.
Right.
Matt, why do you think we're seeing an increase in hip?
Well, I mean, I said it from literally when the next percent first came out. When we were at our second clinic, you know, I was lucky enough that Fleet Feet, which was right down the road, they lent me a couple carbon plated shoes. So they did the first three were the Hoka Carbon X, just the next percents, and then Skechers.
Mhm.
And so I was running on the Ultra G and testing out like the forces of that. And I noticed, because we have cameras inside of it, that as your foot compressed, there was a lot of wobble in it, because the super foam is just like kind of unstable in that aspect when it gets compressed. So it's like, you know, compressing a balloon that doesn't have enough air, it just kind of wobbles like that. And when that happens, you're ancillary moving your foot, and your hip has to react to that. And so either you're getting a lot more like, you know, outside calf tightness to try and lock that ankle down.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, it's going to go straight up to the glutes. And so for the individuals, you know, your high schoolers, your college athletes that are trying to do a majority of your runs in it, you're just overtaxing typically a hip that's already unstable to begin with because it's weak.
What about you, Zach? What do you think?
I don't think, or I think that we're not complementing the shoe with the right strengthening exercises, in my opinion.
What do you think?
I mean, that's the big part to me, is like doing the activation and getting ready to use the shoe. But even brands are learning from runners, where in the past most brands use like a Piba foam, which is more bouncy and responsive.
Mhm.
And more brands now are more and more going to TPU, where you still have that experience, but it's not as aggressive. So it's a little more of like a trainer focused instead of just race focused. So foams are changing as runners experience stuff.
Yeah. I have a different perspective. I actually was talking with Noah about this last time I was down here. But I think that the shoes in general, like Shoe Proper, the companies and industry has gotten so good that they are fixing all of the injuries that would take people out before they could even break down the hip. So I feel like what's actually happening is whereas before in a traditional runner, if they start running, they might get, shin splints because they're not used to the pounding. Well, the shoes will fix that. Next thing you know, they're able to run at such a decent volume that they kind of chew up their hips and knees at a higher rate relative to some other injuries that we used to see before. So I think we're actually kind of like overall as a healthcare industry, treating runners have gotten better at managing all these other injuries. And I feel like the running shoe industry proper, and the advent of cadence and everything, has protected people from these kind of low-hanging injuries, Achilles, plantar fascia, stress fractures, runner's knee kind of conversations. And now they can handle workload and volumes that then start chewing up their hip. Because as we know in rehab, your hip is one of the strongest and most durable joints, and it can handle a ton of compensation. And so often it won't bark at you first because other structures will shut down prior to it. So I feel like that's why we're getting an increase in hip injuries. And I think that's why we're actually getting an increase in spinal fractures and sacral stress fractures is for that very same reason. Because, hip impingements, labral issues, all those sort of conversations are just going through the roof right now because people are training at those loads that are different.
So it's kind of like your last line of defense.
Exactly.
Too. So could part of it be we've focused so long as athletes and runners and rehabbing key points where we've neglected what needs to be activated? Because now this is where we're seeing the injuries occur.
True. And then I think there's the double issue, the other added issue of society, kids coming through now, and society as a whole is sitting more often.
Yeah.
Like literally at the coaches clinic this weekend, Dugan Hill was talking about how, he coached the famous Caldwell teams, and he basically had, all these state championships many years ago. And then he basically was just like, yeah, my kids coming into high school now, they can't handle that volume because they used to work on farms and now they're just not strong like they used to be. And so now all of a sudden, they're getting a little bit more beat up on lower volume, and they're probably sitting more, and sitting is just wrecking the hip.
Well, that could be a whole conversation of how many runners are athletes now and how many runners are runners now.
Yeah.
Right. So you're activating. I think during COVID, that's where I think I at least first saw the big hip flare up issues, is because kids were sitting all day, then trying to jump up and go to practice. And it's like, what were you doing the other 8 hours leading up to practice?
Or even
Sitting
like
on
your
their couch, bent over a coffee table.
Right.
or even like your white collar, workers, like your accountants, your lawyers, they're sitting all day, and then they go out and try to run. I mean, they're going to break down their hips because they don't understand how, when the front of the hip capsule tightens, that deactivates all of the glutes, deactivates all the posterior chain. And the next thing you know, start to get, instead of compressive forces through the hip, you start to get a ton of shearing forces through the hip, and then all bets are off. You're going to get different injuries based on that.
Well, and what I find interesting too, like from my point of view, because I work at a college, and the focus now on lifting is like hex bar deadlift. Like that's like number one. Like everyone should be doing hex bar deadlift. But when it comes to like those bigger chain type movements, that's great. You're working on hip explosion, you're working on glute activation, whatever, glute strength. But then when I watch these athletes do a single leg balance, they're all over the place, and you're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And it's scary. It's scary to see
okay,
that.
so this is another good point, because with this whole awesome notepad here, we have all of this cool fancy terminology.
He actually just learned about the shoes like 20 minutes ago.
This guy doesn't know
like you
anything.
guys.
He's gassing us right now. But basically, with a lot of this stuff, how does that affect proprioception? Which is basically like, if you watch somebody run barefoot, and then you watch somebody run in a big hunky, thick trainer, they're going to run totally different. They're going to land a little bit less efficiently, because the brain knows it's primarily concerned about efficiency. And so if it knows it has a structure under its foot, it will actually give up certain forms so it can basically reserve energy. But it will actually be quite a bit more energy intensive to run barefoot because you are using a higher proportion of muscles. So how does some of this stuff change, like proprioception, like the feel of the ground under you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big proponent of, like, if you think of pizza, right?
I
Meat
always
lovers are
think of
great.
that.
Hey, it will make sense. Meat lovers are great. Veggie pizzas are great, but a cheese pizza is still a good pizza,
Yeah.
right? And that's how, like, I look at footwear. Like, it's awesome having all these tools, but sometimes it's good to get to the basics again. Whether it's, if you're an athlete, you can go for 10 minutes barefoot on the turf or something like that to strengthen stuff. We don't need all these super critical foams all the time. Having a Nike Structure, Mizuno Wave Rider is a good thing still, because you have to remind your body how not to rely on all this stuff all the time, because we can't do that. It's like training. You can't run, all of your workouts at this high interval pace or anything. That's 15 to 18% of your training. That's how footwear should be looked at too.
Yeah. Well, this brings up the other good point of variety is key. So in the research, variety of shoes, variety of foot strikes, variety of foot surfaces, or running surfaces, and all that is critical. So like, some of the days of the week you might run a little bit more stable shoe, and some of the days you might run a little bit more trainer like, or racing flat like shoe. and some of the days you're on trails, some of the days you're on grass. And I think variety is absolutely key to stay healthy. I think, I don't know what you guys feel in the running industry from the shoe perspective. Do you guys advise people to, find your shoe and sort of stick with it? Or do you advise them to sort of like go off, like have a catalog of shoes that you kind of appeal to based on the demands of the day?
I think having that growth and catalog is important. I mean, one of your old podcasts with Clayton, he mentioned how you and Zach, you guys both get on with him of, you get on trails, right? Just because he's an Olympian on a track, he's still on the trail and he's using his body differently. And I think you can look at shoes that way. Like you need to have that recovery shoe, the performance shoe, the trail shoe, the workout shoe. Like there's intervals and changes. And I think it's good for your body not just to know one shoe.
Yeah.
Because every shoe works differently. So it's good to have multiple things to teach your body to use different small parts.
So how would you coach somebody that's interested in that and to create the different catalogs? So what would you say, like, if money was an option, we can create an arsenal of shoes. What would we do?
Yeah, and I think it's important now because this is the largest window of active runners America's ever had.
Yeah.
So if you are a 40-year-old and you're just starting running, it's your first time into it and you have a fall race on the schedule, I'd make sure you have 1 or 2 pairs of everyday trainers, your recovery shoe and a daily trainer shoe. I would have that workout shoe for fartleks, tempos, things like that, and then incorporate that race day shoe along the line. But you have to remember, as fun as the race day shoe is, like you cannot use that shoe if you are not healthy. So you need to use your daily trainers a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Why didn't you tell me that when I ran in those super shoes at Akron or half marathon and fractured my hip?
That's a you issue.
Yeah. Come on, man. You explained it well. You didn't.
That's a you issue.
Yeah.
It was a me issue.
But it's fun. Like it's so hard not
exactly.
to like
It is
if I'm
fun.
staring at my closet of shoes and like,
It's like driving with a pitching wedge. It's just not the right choice.
Yeah, you want to, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, it's good to use your whole arsenal.
Exactly.
You have to not pull the fun stuff every day. Like basic is good.
Well, and I think too, like the super like cool foam shoes are just fun in general. Like I think it's making running fun
For sure.
Well,
but
I mean,
it's keeping they're light, they're springy. I noticed my mile time average go down when I ran it, even though I fractured my hip. That was pretty cool, and I didn't really train at all. But it was fun. But yeah, you're right. Having that variety, having that change in footwear.
And I know Matt and I have talked about it in the past and everything. But like as cool as all of those shoes are, like getting the basics is just as important as anything else we're doing out there.
Right.
What about orthotics? How does that kind of interplay with some of this stuff? Like if somebody has a custom or they want to buy a super feet or, power step?
I mean, every brand industry of orthotics as a whole is growing. I think more people recognize, like if we're going to be specific about how you are choosing your shoes to perform in certain scenarios, you can also put that same concept into inserts, super feet, power step, Curix, whoever it might be. And you have to find what works for you, what's flexible, what's not. It's changed. People used to think orthotics meant injury prevention or I have a reason to wear this, but there's more flexible materials now to take place of sock liners. So it's finding what works for you. You might find like I like them on trails. That little bit extra stability on unstable ground is nice to me.
Yeah.
But it's not something I like daily. But every shoe now has the volume to fit stuff in. It's not like you need an orthotic shoe anymore. It does not exist.
Wow. That's crazy.
I often tell people to get orthotics, not even just for running, but specifically for certain injuries, just walking around and chilling. And I actually almost, depending on certain situations, discourage them from even wearing them in running shoes and just being more concerned about on a daily basis, having them in to sort of protect the foot in a certain way.
Yeah, it's if you're at practice for 90 minutes a day, the other 22.5 hours are probably more important than practice.
Yeah.
Do you notice a difference with like some of the new, I don't want to say like the actual like racing shoes, but some of the like higher end trainers where they might have either, a piece of plastic like midsole like plate in it, or even some of the carbon fiber ones, how that affects with having like an insert in it? Because obviously like, like if you're trying to go fast on the track or something, like in in a Nexpert or whatever, the not Alpha Fly, but the
Like a vapor.
Vapor Fly. Like you're probably not going to put an insert in it unless you like are really pro dating. So
Well,
like
they're hard to put in the vapors.
Yeah.
but like how does that the insert affect differently compared to just like a traditional running shoe like 4 years ago? Like are we seeing like
Does
big
it
changes
deactivate some of the effects of it is what you're
of the
asking?
foam,
Yeah.
or the carbon fiber plate, or does it make it so rigid that like you're not even getting much bend through the foot now because some of them have plastic plates in it as well?
I think that's part of it, and then it comes back to the geometry of the shoes now.
Mhm.
Racing shoes aren't this sleek silhouette anymore all the time. They're that wider, more stable fit.
Mhm.
I mean, my point of view of it is all like if you're going to be running fast, like less is more still in my brain.
Yeah.
So it's like why add extra to the pie? If you're not healthy enough to race, then maybe we shouldn't be in a racing shoe yet, anyways.
Mhm.
So we kind of still discourage it. I know that's not the sales method of a running industry of trying not to
Yeah.
sell it, but it doesn't make sense logically
Yeah.
to be doing that if that's how you stay healthy to be in that race day position.
Cool. Well, any other specific topics you want to bring up?
This notebook is full of a lot of good stuff.
Anything we
No,
haven't hit?
I think the big thing to be aware of is to have an open mind with running shoes
Mhm.
now. There's not just 8 brands out there anymore. There's dozens of brands. We try to do our best, whether it's a Fleet Feet, a Second Soul, a Dave's, to show the industry. But like Zach, you're in Topo. Like we have Topo in one store because it's something we want to try. But like
Mhm.
Under Armour's making a big push. Puma's making a big push. There's so many cool brands out
Mhm.
there. So it's having an open mind, and then also recognize, the shoe's a great tool and it's going to help you and keep you healthy, or in a race day give you that advantage. But there's so much like the shoe's not the only job.
Yeah.
Smiling in a race helps you out, right? It's like there's so much extra
Yeah.
to it than just the shoe.
How many records have been broken in super shoes from American to world?
Probably everything at this point. I mean, if Ryan Hall's just got broken in the half,
I know.
and that was
And
the last one I could really think of.
Of the
Mar-
major ones for the U.S., yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I
That-
don't know if the marathon is still officially Hall's.
Are they? Are we in the realm of cheater shoes? Are these? Would you call them that?
No, not at all. I think this is the new norm. I personally wish I had them 10, 15 years
I
ago.
know.
I mean, I'm
Dude,
thinking,
it's like the shoes and the Mondo tracks now with that honeycomb.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Like-
live like vicariously through it.
You're dying to say that
Dude,
word.
I've been thinking about that since we talked about that.
Yeah, I wish I had this like plethora of stuff to train in, and all this
Yeah.
stuff would have prevented. I mean, I was whatever. Personally, I was hurt, and I was trying to race still, running an 800 in lunar glides because it kept me healthy. And I was like, what was I doing out there? Could I please have a Vaporfly back then? And he felt silly,
Yeah.
but it's just such a cool tool out there now to have.
Are you
Mhm.
less injured than you used to be?
Yeah, definitely.
Because of the shoes.
The shoes, like when you are training, I mean, it's a world of a difference. People are so worried about like this helps the race day from a
Yeah.
college athlete to an everyday athlete, but the amount of protection it gives you for daily training is probably the biggest benefactor to it. I mean, you see college teams now, instead of wearing a Hyperion in the past or a Type A or Streak, they can hammer these 5-8 mile tempos and be fine the next day.
Yeah.
They're not laboring as much, and that's
Mhm.
that's probably the biggest benefactor is the impact on training, not even racing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and we kind of touched on that.
What are your thoughts on that new 3D printed shoe?
Yeah.
From Brooks.
Is it Brooks
Well,
or
I know they're when
was
we were
it?
at the was it the World Champs or Trials?
Trials?
Well, okay,
Was
so
it this year?
World Champs was Asics. It was
Mhm.
sponsored by Asics. So in 2022, it was sponsored by Asics, which was hilarious, by the way, because they made somebody go all around the stadium in Eugene and cover up every single Nike symbol all over
a
that
lot.
stadium, including like if anybody's been to that Hayward Field, the current one, there are like in the bathrooms they have like medals and numbers, race bibs from
Mhm.
from Ashton Eaton and some of the famous Nike athletes, and they literally
Covered it
covered
up.
every single one of that up. But when they were there, what they were doing is they were doing a 3D lab where you can walk in and they scan your foot and all this stuff, and then you come out with the shoe. But basically, they were just showing it with sandals and showing
Yeah.
them how they're going to make that with shoes. Is that coming in the future?
Yeah, you're starting to see it like with On. They just have their new marathon shoe, and it's basically a knitted sock that's made to your foot. And
Whoa.
their top end athletes use it
That's
where
what
it's
it is. It's On, yeah.
individualized. But even like a daily one, like that will come to market, and maybe it'll be a generic fit because you can't make the mold for everyone. But like at the On flagship store in New York City, you can walk into that store,
Mhm.
see the process, and like create it to
Wow.
yourself.
Yeah, it's like effort, or it's like just blended from the sole straight in. There's no like stitching. It's like actually fused in. So I think it like lightens it. I think the racing shoes like only like 6 ounces or something.
I
like
mean,
that.
there's stuff coming out next year in 2026 where you're going to get marathon racing shoes under 4.2 ounces, which is lighter than a Dragonfly in the track. And you're going to have that for a marathon now.
Wow.
That's phenomenal.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're getting back to the lighter is better.
You want less is better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get some heavy legs.
Well, not just that, but just in general, like
yeah.
back in like track days where you get like a 5.1 ounce and you're like, oh, somebody just came out with a 5 point, or you're like 5 ounce exactly.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Well, we're about 40 minutes in, and we're here at live at Second Soul. we have a bit of an audience, so I think it's about time for us to bounce out to some questions. And so, anybody have any questions here? Jared, you got anything? Yeah, let's hear it, man.
So, talk about stack height, and having a higher stack height kind of puts you up more onto your forefoot, and that shortens the Achilles and some of the posterior musculature. Should we all be trying to run in lower drop shoes like like Ultra or Topo? Is that something that we should?
So are you basically saying, like, if you didn't have an injury, should we just err on the side of going lower drop?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think with what Dylan's saying here too, the industry is understanding that as well. Like, you just take, your basic athlete, they're not like me. They don't have a litany of injuries added up, which complicates it. It's like pouring water on a computer. You don't know what you're going to get after once you're recovered. So I think in general, it is smarter to be lower to the ground. It's smarter to be not necessarily stack height per se, but more profile. And then that makes it so that your center mass tips over your ankle in the proper way more consistently. And I think that's better because in the end, that creates more of a piston-like effect on the legs instead of a shearing effect on the legs. And the legs are designed for compression. They're not designed for shearing forces. So I think in a way, that's one way to protect it. But if you get a scenario like mine where, I've got spaghetti holding my ankle together, basically just very little structures, I think, having a little bit higher drop shoe can protect the tendons so they're not asked to do more. That would be basically, in my opinion, one of the only reasons why you would want to consistently hang out in a higher drop shoe so that the heel is much higher than the forefoot. I don't know. What do you guys think with that?
If you're a brand new runner, I've never worn a running shoe, I would lean you towards that middle ground, lower ground. I wouldn't jump right to the 12. I mean, I would go there if it's necessary.
I would probably start with an 8. I think that's a good starting point for somebody who's just starting.
Right. Yeah, and just see how you react to that, basically.
Yeah, good question. Did we kind of answer that? Cool. All right. Any other questions? Anybody else in the crowd? I know we hit on some pretty cool topics. Any last points you guys want to address?
Do your exercises if you're going to wear super shoes.
Yeah. Don't be like us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing though is if we kind of go back to, I like I alluded to, a lot of times in marathons, you'll hear people will be so much louder at the end of the race because they're just slapping the ground and they're just so much less efficient. And a lot of times people, they want to be cool, right? They want to try the coolest thing and they will try some of those super shoes early on in racing. And I think if we're thinking about like a super aggressive super shoe, like an Alpha or something like that, then maybe not start there. Maybe start with the Saucony's line, which is a little bit less aggressive, a little bit more of a normal feel to a shoe, a little bit more of a rocker type. So I think you're not going to slap the ground quite as much.
Yeah.
I think that making some of those adaptations can be beneficial.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add to that, is like, as you're building your shoe line, if you have unlimited money, get your daily trainer, get something that's like a TP or plastic plate to work out in that simulates that race day, and then have that race day. So you don't need to live in carbon all the time. A TP or plastic plate's a little more flexible, a little more durable, and it's not as aggressive on your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've got a good topic to talk about. So for somebody who does buy, like a super shoe, how much or how often should they like practice in it before going out and racing in it?
Yeah, I always thought getting up into the 20-30 mile range on the shoe, sort of the distance of the race you might be training for, like a marathon.
Yeah.
I think that is kind of always felt normal to me, that you might do a couple 10-15 mile runs, and then I think that should be enough to get the feel of the shoe.
Because I know like a lot of people will buy it and then they're expensive, they're $250 to $300 now. So people will like literally only save them for marathons and not want to do a workout in it. And then they just don't have experience of what it feels like. And then that's a bad scenario when you're
especially with,
running 26
one
miles.
of the more aggressive ones, because you don't know how you're going to react in corners, turning corners, literally. Which is crazy to think about. It's like it's almost like you're on ice skates sometimes, because they feel so, high up, and so like you know,
Yeah, your proprioception's off. You didn't
you know,
feel like
you're just
stable
scared to
on it.
like roll your ankle and
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
like it just, you know,
You really tilt in.
yeah,
my
and
corners.
and you just got to be used to that
Mhm.
being almost in like a stiletto sort of thing.
That's like the one category of this industry where most stuff you can take out of a box and go nowadays. There's no break-in period, but like a
Mhm.
racing shoe, you should, yeah, just like Leo said, like we try to say get 1 or 2 key long runs in or a workout to get
Yeah.
used to it because kind of like Matt was saying, like it's just a weird sensation. If you're not
Mhm.
used to it and how your body responds and how the cadence is, it can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
things can pop up. Like you can tweak your back. You know, sometimes you feel
Yeah.
your back different. You feel different muscle groups, and then the obvious blister conversation comes up. You obviously need to try on the shoes and really challenge yourself in a similar scenario to the race. You know, if it's gonna be hot and humid, then you want to probably get on the treadmill and make it pretty miserable or whatever, just so you can like experience that hot and humid setting, so you can see how your foot reacts from a blister standpoint to that shoe.
Mhm.
And we didn't really touch on, but the other part is like the shoes are doing all this cool stuff, but the shoe changes your structure and how you run and your cadence and your knee drive and your, you know, your gait and
Yeah.
everything. So
Mhm.
it's a whole different world going from a Saucony ride to Saucony Pro,
Yeah.
where your body needs to learn how to use it to a point.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, what was interesting actually to that point was when I wore what's the ASIC?
Metaspeeds guy?
Yeah, when I wore those for the first time on the or at the Akron Half Marathon.
Mhm.
By the end of the race, everything isolated to my groin,
Mhm.
and I was like, "Wow, that hurts really bad." Like that's all I remember from that race. And that night, I was hunched over, walking up to my house, and I'm like, I can't get like
so
extended.
interesting.
Get open.
And it was all right. And then once
And then
that
you
one,
gave them to me.
and then I gave them to you, and then you threw them away.
No, I wore them one time and I like destroyed a ligament in my foot.
Yeah, but you're right though. Like it changed my gait pattern and my mechanics.
Yeah, but people shouldn't be afraid of them. I know a lot of
No,
athletes who have the background with spikes. It's the next natural step.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But if you're not used to a super shoe, like they're not only for exclusive runners. I
Mhm.
mean, they're
Mhm.
making shoes now. On's making a super shoe where they have categories. They have that like aggressive elite level shoe. Then they have more of that super shoe that's made for the 4 or 5 hour marathoner now too. So like
Mhm.
it's
That's pretty
different and
cool.
it's changing to be more accommodating to everyone.
What is On's concept with their shoes?
Their whole goal is sensation. So instead of categorizing neutral and stability or whatever, they're all about sensation. Do you want a firmer? Do you want responsive? Do you want plush? It's different. It's unique. They get a lot of
It's kind of like getting a
flack.
mattress.
Yeah. What do you want? What do you
Yeah.
want to sleep on?
Sleep number.
Yeah, I need that. Sleep is horrendous.
Dude, those sleep numbers were those old Reebok pump up shoes.
But it's different. They're a brand where they're the hot brand. People want to try them. It's the
Yeah.
highest return brand by rate because they're just unique. But it's like anything. Everyone makes good product. You have to just try it and trust it and see what works for you. So
It's the highest return brand. Interesting.
Yeah.
What? Who owns the running shoe industry right now?
by market share,
Mhm.
Brooks and Hoka are 1 and 2. Nationwide, Brooks just retook back from Hoka, and typically you only see like a top dog for up to 8 or 10 years, and then there's change. But you know, Asics is the fastest growing right now, and they were the top guy forever, and they
Yeah.
were down to I don't know 5 or 6% market share. Now they're getting back up to 19 or so.
Interesting.
That was my first running shoe. Was a ASIC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like when I first got into the running shoe industry in this store, I feel like a third of every shoe we sold was a 20 series.
Yeah, 2100, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's cool because this industry does feed like as much as a college kid or whoever's just on the fit bench helping you. I mean, over the years, the amount of people who came out of Northeast Ohio from Second Soles or Fleet Feets that now make the shoes. Like Bob Fay started here.
Yeah.
And now he's one of the head brains of Asics, and they have all this cool product. And now our Youngstown store, John Hutton, was with us for a long time, and now he's the lead product line manager of innovation for running footwear for Under Armour. So it's like these
Dang.
small voices go a long way, and then the feedback from customers kind of a direct pipeline back to how the shoe's created, especially in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you got to
That's
keep
awesome.
us in mind when you get big and you start designing some of this stuff.
Yeah, whoever's on the benches, they have to keep me in mind, to keep you in mind. Yeah.
Cool. Any other topics you guys want to hit? I think this was a great episode,
yeah.
and I feel comfortable dishing my patience out to listening to this one because I feel like we covered a lot of good topics.
Mhm.
Any last final bits from the crowd? Thank you guys for hanging out with us, and had a blast here. And I think this is a really cool setup, and we'll definitely want to do it
Yeah.
again.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All the best.
All right.
See you guys till another time. Thank you. Dr. Leo here. Be sure to check out my new book, Faster Without Fail, Your Guide to Overcoming Injuries and Running Faster Than Ever. It is now available on Amazon. You could read reviews on the Amazon. You can check out what other people have said about it. But basically, if you want to revolutionize your running form and better understand how to stay injury-free within the sport, this is your guide. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think of the book. I would love to hear your feedback. But again, please check it out on Amazon. Faster Without Fail. Appreciate it. Dr. Leo here. If you want to catch me in another setting, be sure to check out my YouTube page, Running Rehab, where you will find exercises on how to stay healthy with running, how to improve your running form, and a bunch of other tips and tricks on how to get over common injuries.